Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the floor press, why some people do it, why it's one of my favorite exercises, and this is an exercise that I have used for many, many, many years. I've always been a fan of, I've always liked it. I want to talk about what some of the benefits of it are. And yes, this is for both people who are trying to get big and who are trying to get strong. It's a beneficial assistance movement for the power lifter. It's a beneficial alternative to the bench press as a chest exercise or a period of time when maybe you don't want to work on the bench for whatever reason. Maybe you have some overuse injuries or something going on. For people who are trying to just get a really jacked upper body, right? It is good for both people. And this is the original bench press before we had benches. So why the floor press? Well, number one, it does limit the very bottom of the range of motion. Now, we would think at first, because for some people it could cut several inches out. For me, it cuts out just a hair. I can still touch my chest on it, but I can't sink it. So I lose about 2 inches out of the bottom of the range of motion. Now, that forces us to use a slightly lighter weight in this case, because it's harder. Normally, a lot of guys would say, oh, a partial, you can do a heavier weight. Well, that's true, but this isn't that same sort of partial, and those actually reduce muscle growth, right? You gain less muscle from that. Even if you increase the weight. In this case, though, it forces us to use a slightly lighter weight for very similar muscle fiber recruitment, right? And that's important. When we look at EMG stuff, and what I want to state, I don't necessarily buy into the EMG data on this, and I want that to be very, very clear. I think EMG data can be a good general tool to get us in the ballpark for things, but it's not exact, and the way it's done isn't exact. But there has been data showing that the floor press hits like the upper chest just as good as an incline, right? In some cases, it shows that even when compared to the bench press, the pecs, all parts of the pecs got lit up considerably more. Now, I will say anecdotally, I'd say I feel the floor press more in my chest than any other exercise. But I want to make very, very clear, neither one of those are exact tools, right? Those are not definitive evidence that it's a superior chest exercise. Okay, I want that to be clear. Where you feel something doesn't guarantee that it's always working it harder, right? It's not a guarantee, because our minds play tricks on us with that stuff. And EMGs are not exact tools. So just because, say, an exercise shows 10% better muscle fiber recruitment on one EMG study than another, that's actually within the margin of error for an EMG. So that's not exacting either. But the two together do suggest to us what? That it's a very, very, very good chest exercise. I mean, when it lights up the EMG better than most exercises in that area, and you feel it there, okay, we know it's pretty damn good. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the best, but we know it's good. So it's a tremendous chest builder. And the thing is, it lets you use a slightly lighter weight to get similar levels, or depending upon the data, possibly superior levels of muscle fiber recruitment in those target muscles. Well, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Why? Because if you're using 5% less weight when you get really strong, to do the same reps and sets with 5% less weight loaded on your joints and everything for your work sets does what? It's easier to recover from. If you can recover from it easier, you can probably squeeze out one more set every week, right? Say you're doing 8 sets of bench with a given weight, and that's about all you could handle for the recovery end for that slot. It might let you work in 9 sets before you run into recovery issues, right? You can train a little bit more volume. Well, more training volume usually equals more size and more strength. If you can recover from it, right? That's what we're looking for. So here's the thing, guys. It's exercise to let you do a little more volume than your traditional bench press in some cases. Now, am I telling you to abandon the bench press? No. Do you see me abandoning the bench press? No. But right now the floor press is a heavy staple in my training, and in different phases it is. There are times when I replace the bench with it. I can build my bench off of a floor press. I've always been able to build my bench off a floor press, and lots of power lifters have reported that who do utilize this. What's the other thing it does? Breaks up the eccentric concentric chain, and it removes leg drive. All right, by breaking up the eccentric concentric chain, what do we mean there? Meaning you're forced to take the stretch reflex out. In other words, you have to press from a dead stop. And when you break that up, that's a hard stop on the floor, guys. That is a hard stop. That means you have to be more explosive out of the bottom. More importantly, it's very, very close to being right off the chest if you're big enough to do this lift. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. It's not just about your chest size, and it's not just about, well, you know, it's a partial then. It's not really, because there's something else going on there. It has to do with the size of your back. Your back will change the range of motion, right? Back will change the range of motion because it will let your elbows come further down. In other words, someone who has an extra 2 inches of meat on their back, actually their elbows and arms and everything else are going to come 2 inches lower on the floor press before you come to that hard stop at the bottom. So if you don't have a thick back, I don't think it's a good exercise, because you're not going to get enough range of motion. Unless you start laying on something, but then we're not doing a floor press, we're doing like a pad press or whatever it is you're putting under your back. And then you get into issues of an unstable surface, depending on what you're putting there. You know, it could run into issues. So I'd say, for simplicity's sake, if you don't have a big thick back already, probably don't want to do this. If the bar can't get within a few inches of your chest, you probably don't necessarily want to use this as a staple exercise, right? You don't use it as a staple exercise. I don't recommend it for novice lifters for that reason. Now, if they don't have access to a bench, but they have access to a rack, which you need to have access to a rack, first thing you need to get in your home gym, you can do the floor press in the meantime. Certainly do it. But let's go back to the point. We're breaking up the eccentric concentric chain. We're removing the ability to use a stretch reflex. We are forced to use our chest to explode the weight from close to the bottom. Well, for a lot of benchers, we can argue, depending upon the person, whether your sticking point is actually the pause on the chest or just immediately off the chest. You do not have a sticking point at the lockout. And that's something I've made clear. Lots of coaches who do understand raw lifting make clear. You don't have a lockout problem. But can your sticking point be really, really close to the chest on the bench press? Yes, it can. And if that's the case, guess what? You're now forcing yourself to learn to be explosive and to explode from that point in the lift without a stretch reflex and without leg drive. Well, can't leg drive bridge the gap off that first couple inches also on your chest? Yes, it can. So what we are doing is we are training the same motor pattern as a bench press, the same muscles as the bench press, but without the leg drive or any of that to get us started, or even the cushioning off your chest, because even when you compress it into the chest, you get a little bit of give there, right? And then that leg drive helps you heave it just a little bit. You remove all of that. You remove all of that. It is a true test of dead stop chest strength, but it also requires you to explode from the bottom, right? You have to generate a lot of force because of the dead stop involved, the lack of leg drive, the lack of ability to use any stretch reflex, the inability to use any momentum. It forces you to develop that low starting strength close to the chest. It forces you to develop that just straight raw strength. It forces you. Well, that's good for building starting strength. It's good for building overall strength. It's good for building your chest, right? Building a strong chest, building a powerful chest. Fantastic exercise because it's so damn strict, but it still uses the same bar path and movement pattern as the bench, but just forces you to use a lighter weight. So when we start looking at all of those factors, this is actually a fantastic exercise. When you look at those factors, maybe that's why the EMGs show it hitting the chest so effectively. All right, maybe that's why. You know, so what would be the downside? Why would be the downside? Well, it might not work the triceps as well. That's an arguable point. And why are we doing the bench press? We're doing the bench press to build multiple muscles. You're not doing the bench press just to build your chest. I know people who are real experts say the bench is one of the best chest builders ever. Only silly ass bodybuilders don't think that. But it's also a great tricep builder. So we might be losing some of that on this exercise, right? Because it ended up forcing the chest to work so much harder out of the bottom. So that can be one possible downside, arguable. Other downside, it won't necessarily train your entire body as much, which again, it's a potential downside. We do want most of our exercises to work most of the body. So it's essentially just a smaller, pretty much more isolated version of the bench press. It's a very, very strict version of the bench press. but it's damn effective. And you can build a monstrous bench press and a monstrous chest off this lift. And you can do so without beating yourself up, as long as you learn to not hit the floor too hard. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.